at 911. Where's your emergency?
Hi, yes, my fiance just overdosed. There is a gentleman passed out on the
Heroin
second floor.
is so addictive,
And he passed out in their room.
so dangerous,
What did he take?
so deadly.
It's heroin.
It has become one of the worst drug epidemics in Virginia history.
How old is the patient?
Heroin doesn't care what background you have or where you came from.
34, 35. I don't think he's breathing.
Heroin doesn't care what your skin color is, how smart you are,
He took what?
how old you are, whether you're male or female.
Heroin and Xanax.
Now I approach this moment, this coldness takes over, takes control to cope and is dormant.
Heroin overdose deaths in Virginia nearly doubled from 2011 to 2013.
The answer is no. Know what the answer is? No, that this demon's
Every region has experienced an increase in heroin fatalities,
the sickness is too much for me to handle. My stomach is doing flips. This
including a 164% increase in Northern Virginia,
the demon screaming.
a 94% increase in Hampton Roads, and a 50% increase in the Richmond metro area. Jamal Davis is a homicide detective with the Norfolk Police. His background in narcotics investigation showed him a lot about the dangers of drugs, but heroin comes across his desk more than ever in death investigations.
When I first started back 16 years ago in narcotics, it was mainly cocaine and crack.
Actually, let me come listen to some of that.
But today's heroin user is often quite different from the addict of years past.
Just play one of them.
Far from street-smart junkie stereotypes, users are likely to come to heroin on a much more innocent path, one that begins in a doctor's office, where strong medications called opiates are prescribed to relieve pain after a surgery or injury.
You get clean, and now you're finding out.
Dr. James Thompson is a board-certified addiction medicine specialist and medical director of Clean Life Medical in Richmond.
Because addiction is a lethal disease. People die from it all the time. You meet some people who say they don't like the feeling of having opiates. Others like it, but there's a downside to it and only need to use it when they're in pain. But there will always be a certain percentage who are deeply impressed by the good feeling that opiates give them. Those people, if they're not careful, may find themselves pursuing that feeling.
And then what happens is they become addicted, and then if they end up not being able to get that medication, they'll turn to heroin, which is a cheaper form of the same type of substance.
Evan Barlow began experimenting with opiates in his teens, becoming completely addicted from age 16 to 20.
Eventually, pills weren't enough, and I eventually found heroin, then I eventually found the needle, which was my downfall.
So Jamie doesn't want to come over here?
Hannah Newsom's life was all late nights and parties when she began to abuse prescription pain pills. When those became harder to get, her friends began using heroin instead.
First, I was like, no. There is no way in the world that I'm gonna do that. And eventually, you know, pills weren't around and I was sick. So I tried it. I was maybe like 85 pounds, 90 pounds. My body was shutting down. I was sick all the time. No matter how much heroin I did, I was still sick. And then that was the start of the end.
My son is a heroin addict, and he's fallen out, and I can't wake him up. And I don't know what's wrong with him.
As demand increases, some dealers may add other substances to make the heroin more appealing to users. One such substance is fentanyl, a powerful painkiller often prescribed to cancer patients. The intent is to create a more intense high, but it often leads instead to abrupt death.
I can't feel anything.
He's not breathing?
I can't feel anything coming out of his nose.
And fentanyl is a very strong painkiller, so it kind of like slows your heartbeat and your breathing down to almost nothing. With that on top of the heroin, people just expire because their heart stop beating and their lungs stop functioning.
And in Richmond, for example, the heroin was mixed with a horse tranquilizer. So heroin alone is deadly, but when you mix it with a substance like fentanyl, a painkiller, you don't stand a chance.
Some overdoses, if their friends and family react quick enough, they can be saved. But a lot of them, with the fentanyl cases, we're finding that even with quick reaction, they still passing away.
I think my friend just overdosed on heroin.
He's unconscious?
Yeah.
Still, despite warnings and news stories about the presence of dangerous additives, addicts in search of a bigger high are still willing to take the risk.
And unfortunately on the streets, if you have a heroin out there that overdoses and kills somebody, for some strange reason, more people want it.
People will be shocked by someone who dies of an overdose when I just see it and I'm like, well, it happened again, like, because it happens all the time.
Users who somehow avoid a fatal overdose are lucky not to face death, but they say what they're left with isn't much of a life.
I wasn't really living at all. I was dead inside. I was just walking around getting high every day. I had no purpose. I had no place on this planet to be anything. I was just a shell, and I would just use every day.
As their use of the drug increases, many don't realize the gravity of the situation until they begin to suffer the consequences of their dependency on the substance.
In other words, getting in trouble with the law, beginning to violate their own moral code, having to tell lies, having to hide their problem, having to steal from and deceive the people that they care about.
Everything in my life revolved around it. I didn't care about anything else. I stole from my family, from my friends, from stores, from anybody that had anything that the dope man would trade me for drugs.
With desperate users resorting to theft to pay for their habit, and ruthless sellers often using violence and gang activity to protect their profits, the heroin problem affects everyone in the Commonwealth.
And so we have an epidemic, and the epidemic has led to a lot of people whose lives have been ruined and to a lot of people who have died.
Too many Virginians are losing their loved ones to heroin and prescription drug overdoses. I don't want to see another parent bury a child, or another child to lose a parent to these dangerous drugs.
The problem is particularly evident in Hampton Roads, where the region's coastal location makes it particularly appealing to traffickers.
It's centralized. You can get drugs coming in from the ports, coming from Miami, and people from New York, people from out west Kentucky, West Virginia would come here to meet.
And we're on the Intercoastal Waterway, which goes from